A three-day visit to the United States Capitol by China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is coming to an end. Highlights included meetings at the State Department, at the U.S. Capitol, and at the White House. We have team coverage of it all with our correspondents who've been following it every step of the way. Wang Guan, our chief political correspondent of the CCTV Mandarin service, and of course, CCTV's Sean Calebs, who begins our coverage with Wang Yi's final day in Washington.
Whether side by side with his U.S. counterpart John Kerry, on Capitol Hill with the powerful House Foreign Affairs Committee, or a greeting in the Oval Office with the U.S. President, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said this important three-day U.S. trip would set the tone for diplomatic relations between the two largest economies on Earth.
A good China-U.S. relationship will benefit both nations and the world at large.
Wang Yi spoke for an hour and a half at a Washington, D.C. think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, covering an array of topics, but conceding his audience clearly cared about two specifically, the dispute over the South China Sea and the DPRK.
First of all, we're against the development of nuclear weapons by the DPRK.
Wang's first public comments about the region since word broke that the U.S. and China had agreed on tougher UN sanctions against Pyongyang for violating UN nuclear restrictions.
There will be a new UN Security Council resolution entailing further actions to limit the development of nuclear missile technologies in the DPRK. Yet at the same time, we must not give up on peace talks, which provide the only viable solution to the nuclear issue.
China and the United States have been united in their desire to punish the DPRK's recent nuclear test and rocket launch, but have been divided over how severe sanctions should be. Wang says the new resolution will change the way China deals with the DPRK. At the same time, Wang told the group China has every reason to be concerned the United States may deploy an anti-ballistic missile system in South Korea known as THAAD.
But I must point out that the X-band radar associated with the THAAD system has a radius that goes far beyond the Korean Peninsula and reaches into the interior of China.
And that, he says, is a security concern for China. The South China Sea is the other security concern for the U.S. and China, with the United States accusing China of militarizing the region. The foreign minister dismissed the allegation, saying China has every right to defend islands they have historically claimed. And when it comes to disagreements in the region, Wang says China and other ASEAN nations are capable of resolving their own disputes.
Countries from outside of the region, it is hoped, will support the resolution of the disputes through negotiation between the directly concerned parties.
Now, throughout the trip, the Chinese foreign minister has consistently said subjects they agree on far outweigh those that cause friction. But Wang is leaving the United States without any significant breakthrough in the South China Sea, an area in which the two superpowers, at least for the time being, are willing to agree to disagree. Mike?
And Wang Guan is here. We're going to have a little discussion about this. But let me start with you. One of the things he also addressed, and you brought it up in your introduction, which is these are the two largest economies in the world. And he was asked questions about that. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, it was really interesting to at this discussion today, his prepared comments, which he just seemed to talk off the cuff for about 45 minutes straight, and then answer a series of questions from the 200 or so people. About the first 30 minutes was completely on China's economy as well as global trade. And I thought it was very interesting where he talked in detail about how China has pulled 600 million people out of poverty. And for some time now, China has been the engine that has been driving the global economy. And clearly the crowd assembled here today is wondering, they've seen what happened to the stock market, what's going to happen in the future. Well, Wang Yi said that China is not going to have a hard landing. I think that was important. And he talked about how China's economy is changing. We've talked a lot about that. And it hasn't been easy for China, but he talked about the potential in that country for consumer purchasing, and it's huge, and it's going to have a huge impact in the next decade. It's only a matter of time before China becomes the largest economy in the world.
And Wang Guan, we know that China's philosophy, win-win cooperation. Obviously, we want mutual respect. Wang Yi came in with one attitude about how to deal with Pyongyang. The U.S. had a different attitude, and yet they managed to have a consensus here.
Right. I think that was one of the highlights. I agree with Sean in that on the issues of South China Sea, the two sides really just restated their positions that have been previously stated many, many times over. But on North Korea, the two sides really told reporters 2 days ago when Wang Yi was in the press conference with John Kerry, saying that the first draft of the UN resolution on the sanction of North Korea could be coming in the next few days. And the two sides obviously bridged their differences on which sectors to sanction. The U.S. wants sanctions to cover a comprehensive area of sectors, where the Chinese only want sanctions on the nuclear technology or nuclear-related sectors.
It's interesting because the United States seems to have jitters about South China Sea, what China's up to, and yet China has jitters about the United States and the relationship with the ROK and this THAAD missile system, and I think he was pretty clear about that as well, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it was interesting that Wang Yi took questions, and I thought it was very forthcoming, very unfiltered discussion, and he was specifically asked, okay, you have issues with the United States coming through there with warships, but how is this any different from putting military installations on these islands and reefs? And then secondly, he was asked point blank why, if indeed the Philippines takes its argument to The Hague, and China has said that it will not recognize that, how that plays out. And I can't really summarize in just a few seconds Wang Yi's comments. He's a great diplomat, but he went on for about 10 minutes in detail explaining how they got to this point, and said that it was basically the Philippines that broke off discussions, and China is ready to open up these talks to continue on this tenuous, tense issue. Now it's
diplomacy is a relationship built, and this relationship built over time. I mean, about Iran, clearly it's very involved in those talks, meeting several times now in just the last 30 days.
Also, talking about this, Mike, my observation is that I think the relationship is really developing on two very different tracks. Have the Commander Harry Harris of PACOM, his personal view that he does not believe those islands in South China Sea belong to China, which of course is a deviation from the official U.S. position. But on the economic and diplomatic side, like you said, Mike, the two sides work very closely on the Iran deal, on climate change, and potentially on the reconstruction of Afghanistan. And also the two countries enjoy the largest trading relationship in the world. Really, there seems to be a disconnect there. That's why I asked this very question about the two tracks to Secretary Kerry as well as to China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi during the press conference 2 days ago. If we have that soundbite.
A chance to report from CCTV. Thank you.
This relationship seems to be developing on two different tracks. On the security side, you have your colleague, Secretary Carter, specifying China 2 weeks ago as the most stressing competitor, more budget to upgrade America's weaponry and capabilities in Asia-Pacific. However, on the diplomatic and economic side, part of which led by you have this largest trading relationship in the world, and you have increasing China-U.S. partnership on Iran, on climate change, for example. So at this point, do you think the Pentagon, the PACOM, and the State Department led by you really want the same thing for this relationship? Thank you.
It's a very, very good question about the two tracks. Let me make this as clear as I can. Our job is to pursue the diplomatic opportunities for peaceful resolution and a negotiated settlement to one conflict or another. But it is PACOM's job, and it is the Department of Defense's job, and it is the Secretary of Defense's job to address what happens when measures fail. Those are the departments of, so they will see the world in terms of potential future threats. The PLA does the same thing. And when the Defense Department makes it based on its best judgment about how to deal with balance. But the more we can work together, the more we resolve these issues, the less need there is, obviously, for the measure of expenditure that is to other sectors, particularly in a world where counter is so urgent and counter and expenditures to try to deal with failed and failing states is far more important than a bi-state arms race.
And in sum, we need to take a telescope to visualize the future rather than using a microscope to amplify the problems. And I hope that our two sides can continue to take a long-term perspective and a strategic objective.
Very interesting. Microscope versus telescope.
Exactly.
I guess it gets to your point in some respects.
Yeah, what do you think, Sean,
Well,
after covering this thing?
I think it was amazing that it's the third, we can't lose sight of the fact, this is the third time in 30 days that these two diplomatic leaders have face-to-face. It's clear that both these countries not only say they have a good relationship, they need to have a good working relationship going together for the global good. And it's something they've certainly tried to do. I certainly got the sense that Wang Yi was very open, very forthcoming, and I wouldn't say he was frustrated by so much discussion about the South China Sea, but people seem to overlook.
Yeah, I have one personal observation that is towards the end of the press conference. When Wang Yi walked over to Secretary Kerry and had this final handshake, and then Wang Yi said, Kerry said, which hotel are you staying? And then Wang Yi said, I'll call you tonight. I brought you a Maotai, which is the strongest liquor on earth, the Chinese liquor. So they just got in and drank that bottle up.
Well, they'll definitely need microscopes and telescopes.
Exactly. And I think that the nuclear summit coming up in the end of March is going to be a chance just to continue on the dialogue 72 hours and really over the last 30 days.
It's something they have to continue to build on. Thank you both for coming on and talking.